Hey all, I'm Elysia Buss, host of Horsepower Empowerment Through Connection, and today I have the great pleasure of getting to interview Tracy Weber, who is living in Frankenmuth, Michigan. It's kind of a funny name, and she is also previously connected to Prescott College. Previously, correct? You're
Correct.
no longer working. Yes, no longer working at Prescott. But I love the Prescott network. There are just so many amazing people within it. And I love connecting with people and getting to have memories about Paul Smith, who is an incredible human being. I think some of you may have heard me talk about him on here before, who had founded Centaur Leadership. And he was partnering with Pam McPhee, who is also just such a good heart human. I love her. She's in New Hampshire. We'll get to have her on the show eventually. But Tracy has created some really cool process cards and a book that she's rewriting that we're going to get to dive into a little bit. She's yet another author on here. I love getting to talk about people who have risen to the occasion and been able to write a book. It's not an easy process, you guys. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to write a book before. It is definitely something that's interesting. I'll call myself out here. I am going to be starting to write a book. I'm very excited about it. Yeah, I know. So it's I'll tell you more about it once we're getting closer, but I did come up with a really cool name. I'm not sure if I'm ready. I'm ready to let go of it yet, but you just wait.
Okay.
It's going to be epic.
Awesome.
So Tracy, thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. And we've got a chance to get to know each other a little bit before the call, and you've got a lot of exciting and wonderful ideas and things going on. So it's a pleasure to be a part of this experience with you. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. You're very welcome. So Tracy, tell us more about, well, I want you to give your funny little pitch first about Frankenmuth, because you were like telling me for a hot minute before that. And we just do like a 30-second like funny thing. You can tell them why you know so much about this little town that you're currently living in, but not from.
Okay, so Frankenmuth was founded by German Lutheran missionaries in 1845, and it means courage of the Franconians. And at one point in my career, I actually was a step-on guide and would wear a dirndl, which is a German dress. And so, yes. And my husband owns the oldest car dealership in the United States.
Oh, wow.
So there are multiple generation families here. And in fact, his car dealership started out as a blacksmith shop. So
fascinating.
Yeah, it's a fascinating community. And like I said, I could talk for hours about our little town, but I invite everyone to come and visit and look me up if you do.
Oh, fabulous. That's so generous of you. I love
yeah,
that.
and it's right here. We have our mid-Michigan map, so we're right there.
Yes. It's like your horse in your book is putting its hoof on the town, Carolot. Am I remembering that correctly? Yeah. The town of Carolot. Produce carrots. So speaking of your lovely book, Wildly Successful, that's the name of the book. She's not just wildly successful. I mean, she probably is, but it's the book we're talking about, people. All right. Wildly successful. You want to be wildly successful? You should read this fable about being wildly successful. Tracy, tell us a little bit more about your fabulous little book.
Well, it's a story about a company which is run by horses. So it was actually my herd. And the leader, her name is Tigger, which was a Percheron draft mare, was very much organization-centric or leader-centric. And so she needed to really flip her paradigm to become much more organization for everybody and actually get all the voices in the room. So she goes to a learning experience, which is a human learning experience instead of an equine-assisted learning experience. So I flip it. But I've walked through all of the steps of what we do. Like we start with meet and greet, we do all these other things. So it's embedded in the actual process of organizational development, of creating effective communication, of conflict. There's a personality profile for each of the horses, and they go into crisis mode in a very scientifically mapped way, which is based on process communication model. So in the back of the book are some of the resources that I use to really frame it. And so as you were saying about writing a book, it's like giving birth. It's a hard process. But it was one of those things that is really joyful when you're done. and it felt like it needed to be born. So I'm rewriting it in order to rebirth it again and add new things that I've learned. And hopefully, I didn't really market it strongly when it first came out. And it was at a time in my life where that just didn't fit as well. And so now it's time again to see where there's traction, where it can serve, where it can develop conversations that, because I've gotten some great reviews from like Marshall Goldsmith and different people that I highly respect in the OD world. And so I think it's time for it to make its, before the end of the year is my time frame. So I'm giving my
accountability, folks. You hear that? The end of the year. We're all going to help Tracy. So you said, you're welcome. So the OD world, for people who don't know what that is, can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Organizational development is really when you've got consultants or professionals that come in, and most of them will do everything from soup to nuts. So it's your strategic planning, it's your effective communication. My lane is the team building, the leadership training, and that's where we take small, it's primarily my favorite is small groups or teams, say 12 to 14 people. And we're working on both inter and intrapersonal. So what that means is we're working about the relationships and healthy conflict between the individuals, as well as the self-awareness of how you show up in relationship. And so that's a sweet spot that I just love to work with. And especially in education, because when you think about schools, teachers have their own classrooms, but they're part of a larger school system. And so as we were talking earlier, it's not about the content of whatever you're teaching, it's really about the process. And that means, how do you intentionally create engaged learning environments? Whether you're in a corporation, whether you're in a family, or whether you're in a school, how do you create that place where you're heard and you hear others? And so while we were talking about OD, this can actually be transferable across different disciplines.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Tracy.
You're welcome.
So what's your why? What brought you to this work? Why do you use it with horses? Like, what's your why?
My why is, I started out as a barn rat. This is back in the 70s, in the back of a horse trailer. This is the window on the world. And they pretty much, horses, and being a part of that community, being responsible and accountable, not to my own drummer, but to the bigger picture and to their agenda, taught me hard work, taught me, all of those great life lessons, and probably saved me because it was before Title IX. So girls didn't have a lot of options around sports in some of those communities. And so that was what happened in the 70s and 80s. And then life happened in between. And when I went to a master's degree at RIT, I was introduced to experiential learning for the first time. And when someone said you can do experiential learning, low ropes or high ropes, if people are familiar with any of that, in partnership with horses, I was all in. And
so you're like, where do I sign?
Absolutely. There's lots of stories there, but anyway, so the why is I've witnessed life-changing and profound experiences that I've helped facilitate. That is not me. It's the ability to help work with others and create those opportunities for others. And it just feeds me. It's what I'm meant to do.
That's beautiful. Can you share some of those profound stories with us today?
Sure. One of the ones that, because you just can't make this shit up, right? One of my favorite experiences was I taught a course for Northwood University. It was called Social 45, the Culture of Leadership. And so it was adult learners coming back for their bachelor's degree. And typically, 12 to 14 people for a weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And the process that we had was, I would say I stumbled across it, but I'm sure it was not that. It was a accumulation of all that I'd learned about trying to do this work. And it worked so well. Like in the beginning, we created this community, and then that was day one, get them used to the environment, because it was a living room setting, the horses, all of those kinds of new things, because they were used to sitting in a typical classroom and take them out of their comfort zone. Day two, we did an activity where we really broke them apart and made them look at their leadership definition and their choices and everything. And they hated us by noon. If they didn't, we didn't do it right. So we created that conflict. And then we brought them all back together in the afternoon on day 2 and created that healthy, awareness around, now what do you do with it? This is happening to you all the time. And then day 3 was a journey where they would walk into the future and they would create a path into the future they desired. And so one time we're going to start the class and one of our students comes in and they're sitting down, just kind of get comfortable in the space. And you can tell this guy's off. You can just see something happen. And so I don't remember his name, but I'll say Jim, so, hey, Jim, you don't seem to be really here. Are you okay? And he said, well, one of my daughter's best friends committed suicide last night. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to be here this weekend. And I'm like, okay, well, you let us know how we can best support you. And we'll do whatever it takes. And if you need to go, then, we'll honor and respect that. Well, after day 1, he came back and he said, this is phenomenal. Like all the things I'm learning, I'm helping my daughter and her friends cope with all of what I know. Right? It was pretty amazing. And his day 3 path had the whole class as his support system. And you can't make this shit up.
That's really beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much for that. It is really beautiful how the work can help support us and help also give us that stability and regulation, right? And help us to ground through experiences so that we're able to process more and be able to then give that gift to another person. I mean, that's the great thing about the work that we do as individuals. Not just you and I, but any individual that's working on their personal growth, that they're able to then transcend those spaces and then give that gift and role model to another human being so that they can have a better life. And horses are just...
the courage it took him to be that vulnerable that fast.
Yeah, that's really impressive. It truly is. I guess that's such a traumatic thing.
Yeah, it really was. And it's one of those things where you're where you're supposed to be, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that powerful story with us today. It's I'm curious, how did the horses respond to him in that journey over those 3 days?
I'm so blessed to have this amazing herd. And I encourage anybody that can pull this off to do the same thing. I had miniature horses, I had a draft, I had light horses, a couple quarters, and the integration of them, because one of my miniatures was higher up in the pecking order than one of my quarter horses. So there were so many profound things that would happen just through the dynamics of those two interacting, right? And we had and Gil. It was just really wonderful. I don't remember the specifics of the activities. It's probably been 10 years or so since I actually delivered that course. But to this day, people will come up to me locally, because this is the local college, and they'll recognize me and say, I still remember wah, wah, wah. And I just got a LinkedIn, somebody messaged me and said, yeah, I was there at a half a day. Must have been a demo. And it stuck with me forever. And I'm telling my friend who ends up being a dean of a college about you. And so it's the sort of thing that has that lasting impact.
Yeah.
And, it really is. It's a game changer. It helps people pivot. And as you and I were laughing earlier, once you know some things like that, you can't unknow them. And so you've sent them down this path of self-awareness, should they choose to. I mean, we continually have to relearn some lessons.
Oh, yeah.
But you open a door. So.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I've seen minis push draft horses around because the minis were higher up on the pecking order with the herd. And I always just thought that was the funniest darn thing. You're like the draft could literally squish you with one stomp. You just be done. And for some reason the draft is just super passive and that mini is like, I have Napoleon complex, I'm gonna get you. And they're like, here's a pin, and they're just driving that draft. And it is the funniest darn thing you have ever seen. It's just how many times do we see that in life? It's just the one with the strongest personality can push around the biggest people that could potentially be in a more powerful position, but because the the other person is in a different space. They just run
Well,
the roost. And
yeah, our shorthand for that is who can move who. So
yeah.
the power is in who can move who. And that, yeah, we had that strong little miniature mare. We actually called her Minnie, and our boy was Mickey, so we had Mickey and Minnie.
Oh, I love that. That's so cute.
And Minnie was, yeah, they're great. And she was, you know, she had a big personality. And so it really became that transferable lesson around it's about respect and all these other, so it's just so easy to have those conversations, because then people start to go, oh, you mean it's not, that's why I don't listen to my manager. That's why I listen to this person, is because they get things done or I respect them. And it's like, now that you have that information, what are you going to do about it? You know?
Yeah. And also, I'm sure you talk about the difference between toxic leadership and healthy leadership styles.
Yeah, one of my favorite models actually is Cartman's drama and compassion triangle. And we use that quite a bit to help people recognize that you have a choice on how to respond, whether you want to be resourceful, persistent, or open, which is compassion, or if you want to go into victim and some of the negative behaviors. And we can actually walk through what those things look like, but recognizing that we all go back and forth. So you go into drama triangle when you want to be justified. And who doesn't at certain times, right? I mean, let's be honest, we're human. So there are
For
times
sure.
where
100%.
I want to be justified. I want to be right. I don't want to be healthy, you know, but when
I don't
you
want to be
know
held
that,
accountable for my part of it. It's all their fault. Nothing to do with me.
Yeah, exactly. And so knowing that helps people understand then, okay, so if I get out of that, then I can make choices over here that are healthy conflict. And so we'll do activities, or typically my model is I lay down a concept like that and then create an activity that is as close to their world as I can get. So for example, we had some physicians that were coming out, going to be physicians. And so we created this arbitrary scale on how to assess the horses, just totally made up. But that's what physicians do, right? They go out and they assess their patients. And so we had them in these small groups, right? Had them in the small groups, and each one had a horse and they had different assessment tools. And one of the profound stories out of that group was I had a young budding doctor tell me that they were a great team. And I had witnessed this group work together, and they weren't a great team. And I said, no, you aren't. And he's like, well, what? Yeah, you got all doctor on me. And I said, well, no, you weren't. And here's why. And he said, well, yeah, we were. And I said something to the effect of, well, okay, you're an expert in medicine. I'm an expert in teams. I know what a high performance team is. I've studied it. I've researched it. I've lived it.
And it's not you.
But you can defend that position if you want, or you can learn from me about what it would look like to be a high performer. And so one of his supervisors happened to be watching, and he came over and he said, pay attention to that lesson. Because if you're seeing a patient and some other expert comes in and gives you advice and says you're wrong in your diagnosis, you want to listen to the expert, not be right. And so everybody in that pasture, and there was probably 25 or 30 of them, were like, oh. And you can't script that kind of meaningful moment, teachable moment, right?
Yeah.
It was so wonderful for this doctor to have this aha, that him being right about being a team, it had nothing to do with the horse. It had to do with his limiting belief that he knew everything. And so that's why I say, you know, it's just amazing. I didn't plan for that.
Yeah.
But because I created the environment that it could happen in, it did.
Yeah, that's really great. I appreciate you sharing that. It's interesting because there's always something more to learn in life. It's like no matter how gifted you are in whatever profession that you're in, there's an infinite amount of knowledge. And if you feel like you've tapped out, that's the beauty of research and getting to push yourself and explore the field more to find the next level. And, you know, maybe you get to be that innovator of your field because there's just always more out there. And that's what humility is. And it's so important. I love the whole like 6-9 principle, right?
Oh, what's that?
Depends on which side you're looking at it.
Okay. Oh, I got it. 6'9". Okay.
Six,
Yeah.
6 and 9. Like
Right.
if you're on one side, it looks like a 6. If you're on the other side, it looks like a 9. You're both right.
Exactly.
Like, what's your perspective in life? And
Right.
yeah, and nobody really like. I mean, I feel like nobody really likes to be wrong. I mean, maybe I'm working on not saying things in absolutes because there's somebody out there that might, but
Right.
because you can appreciate the uncomfortable spaces of learning something else
Mhm.
while still just being like, oh, that's not, because there's ego attached to it is the problem. And so if you can just get rid of the ego, or like acknowledge it and be like, I see you, and like moving on with the day, now we're going to do this over here. It's just so important, because if you truly want to be the best at what you do, you have to be willing to admit that you don't know everything.
Well,
And when, yeah.
there's a theory called cognitive dissonance. I just read a
Oh,
great
yes.
article.
Thank you for bringing up cognitive dissonance. That's a great thing
Yeah.
to get to talk about. Let's talk
Yeah.
about that.
Well, and I think it's significant now, especially in the times that we're in, with how polarized we are. Um,
Absolutely.
and there's a theorist you'll find in the resources that I shared with you, Barry Johnson. And he's got a new book coming out, and he's got an organization called Polarity Partnerships. But the name of the book is And. So it's how do you leverage the best of both and minimize the worst of both sides? Because there is good and bad to whatever your two poles are, regardless of what you pick. And it's not just political parties, it's just opinions or positions. And so there's a method, a process to walk into that relationship looking for the best of both. And looking at the world through that perspective, or creating organizations where people are even taught the language of and, can really be game shifting, because then your systems start to pay attention to, wait a minute, it's not that either or, it's not that black or white, it's the
Yeah.
and.
Can you give our viewers like a really like clear definition of what cognitive dissonance is? Since there are many people out there that probably have never heard of it.
I read the article, but I kind of scanned it. I would say it's that disconnect. It's the uncomfortable feeling of being wrong, which was what you were speaking to before, and trying to reduce that gap so that you're right. So you find evidence to support your position, as opposed to being open to questioning and learning from the other side of what might not resonate, because that feeling of disconnect and angst around being wrong is what's driving you to look for more to support what you've already decided. And
Right.
that's also shows up in the ladder of inference, which is Peter Senge, and Argyris is the one that actually founded that theory. But it basically says you go out and find to support what you've already decided. And when you can press pause and look at the alternative as an option, then you start to recognize that, oh, there may be more than one way that this can be.
Yeah, and it's a really great point when it comes to research in general, which is why we talk about needing unbiased research. Because when you have a bias when you're doing research, then you're only going to find the supporting evidence to back up that bias, which is why it's so important for us to do like mixed methodology studies and like qualitative and quantitative research that's done over like longitudinal, like long periods of time, so that you can have like a big enough study group so that you don't have as much of that bias in there. Because when you have people, your peers, reviewing the research that you've done, it makes it really easy for people like third parties to read your research and notice whether or not that you have a bias. And as a researcher, like when I had to do research for my thesis, we have to like look outside of ourselves and make sure we have other people check our work. Just like when we talk about politics or anything else, be like, okay, why do we have fact checkers? It's because there's so much information out there, and there's a lot of misinformation. So it doesn't really matter like what aspect of the spectrum you come from on any subject, political or otherwise. It's really important to talk to a bunch of other people and learn how to have healthy communication and boundaries, so you can have those neutral, respectful communication cycles with people that don't necessarily have the same opinion that you have, because you can always agree to disagree. And if somebody is toxic in your life, you get to learn that like, hey, this person not only is like not in alignment with me, but they're also antagonistic towards me and not in a space due to their own personal history to engage with me in a functional manner where we both can actually be respected. which doesn't mean that they're necessarily a bad person. I mean, they might be a bad person, like dependent upon their actions, but most people, when they have actions that are coming forth in that manner, it's coming from a place of pain. So while we ideally, most of us would like to help people, we also have to safeguard ourselves in our own personal journey and that of our family members and our friends, to create those functional spaces. And not everybody is in a growth mindset. You know, we all have been in places. There's that absolute. I got to call myself on it, working on my life.
But it's good you're listening to yourself. That's the first step, right?
Yeah, you got to listen to yourself. They're like, what are those words? Like, so many people speak in generalization, and we've abbreviated too many things. The English language is so expansive. Like, there's so many different words to actually
We
to be appropriate for what it is that you're trying
have
to
a tool too where we teach people.
Right.
We teach people certain words to eliminate because they can be triggers. So if you have a sentence and you, Elysia, you know, your hair looks beautiful, but boy, that necklace is ugly. All you hear is everything after the but, right?
Yeah, no,
so
it's
you
true.
Replacing and getting rid of but because you don't hear anything before that. And there's a whole list. And one of them is those absolutes, but see, you've got to listen to yourself talk, right? So that you can practice, actually get your messaging the way you want it to. And back to your earlier point as well, when you were talking about toxic people, one of the other kind of tools that we use is feedback is always about the sender. It may or may not be about the receiver. So you have a choice to accept that feedback. If it serves you, take it in and make the change. If it doesn't, recognize it may have nothing to do with you. It could be totally about that other person's agenda, as you said, their fears, their place of pain, their story. It might not have anything to do with your story.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many people are operating out of fear right now, which is why I try to help people so much with the life coaching and emotional regulation, because it is incredibly difficult for most people to make logical decisions when in a fear state. And so that's why it's important to be able to do whatever you need to do for yourself to, you know, de-escalate and come into a place where you can actually make logical decisions. Because if you're in a fear state, and you see somebody else in a fear state, and then you get angry at them because they're not able to communicate properly with you, like, what about you?
Right.
To be expecting somebody else to be able to manage their lives and be able to be kind and have the best actions and be respectful when you're not actually doing that for yourself. That's a hard conversation to have with people. Most people, I don't think, want to be called a hypocrite. They're like, there's just this immediate block that goes up where you're like, what? No, that's not me. And you're like, but is it? And you don't need to be shameful about it. You don't need to feel guilt. But I think acknowledging that so many of us are coming from a place of pain, and we're finding a lot of people are dropping into escapism because either they're not prepared to face that within themselves, or no one has ever shown them how to regulate their emotions. They don't have healthy coping skills, that like they just don't know what else to do. And when somebody is ignorant, or and there's a lot of baggage on that word ignorant too, which is unfortunate, because it's just it's one of those things that, like, it is what it is. You don't have to judge somebody for not knowing something. I've known tons of people that have not gone to college that are incredibly intelligent human beings, like wicked amazing at like what they do in life. But somehow some other people want to judge them because they didn't go to college. And I went to college for 10 years. I don't think I'm better than anybody else because I went to college for that long. I'm like, most of the best things I learned in life happened outside of college, or what I had to face by the stuff that I had to confront in college because of the things that I experienced that were not ideal, and how teachers interacted with me because there was so much injustice actually occurring in school that I was trying to call people out on. And I didn't have the space within myself to confront that in a proper manner. That's where I was like, oh, I learned so much about myself. I learned more about myself going to college than I did about the content within. And and so I'm like, man, I wish I would have been one of those people in the beginning that didn't go to college, because I have a lot less debt right now. Those people that knew what they wanted to do straight out of high school and they just lived life and they have these wonderful, fantastic jobs that I'm just like, and they feel fulfilled. I'm like, man, did you make the right decision? Like, way to be young and know yourself, like straight out of the gate. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, but look at your life path has brought you here.
It's true.
Which,
And my life has brought me here, and I'm grateful for that, for all the mistakes, for the pain that I've experienced. While it wasn't comfortable to go through a lot of the things that I went through, like I've been through a fair amount, and maybe someday I'll share the depth of those stories. But it brought me to here today, and I get to consciously decide to not live in my past.
right.
To honor and appreciate both the light and shadow created by my past, live in the present, and be able to offer myself to people in the present and in the future to help facilitate their life journey, so that they don't have to go through like the kind of pain and confusion and frustration and all the things that I went through. Like, if I would have had a life coach when I was a kid or a teenager or 20s, oh my gosh, like, so much less pain that I would have had to go through. Like, I would have caused way less pain to other people, and that would have been great. But yes, having gratitude for like the life that we have lived can be difficult to have gratitude and grace, but that doesn't make it any less important just because something is hard.
Right. And maybe, at this time of profound change, that there'll be an opportunity for that recognition that some of the skills that we should be incorporating into our systems, whether it's into our companies or whether it's into our school systems, is that support system, that building of resilience and capacity, that awareness of social emotional regulation and how to deal with that.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm part of different communities that's the dialogue they're having. So I'm hopeful.
No, that's exciting.
It's a heavy lift, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I was grateful to see that social emotional learning was being integrated into schools in Washington State just last year. I was like, oh my gosh, there's hope. There might actually be change. But it'll be really interesting to see how that's implemented this year with the pandemic going on. And there have been a lot of really big points coming up about like just the domino effect and trauma. And yeah, it's just a lot to ask a little kid to confront in dealing with that environment that will be required to keep people safe going back into schools. And schools aren't built to have class sizes as small as they'll need to, just from a spatial standpoint. It's going to be really interesting, which brings us to you, and you're building your website, and you're wanting to collaborate with other equine professionals, right?
Yeah. So
more about that.
Folks have known me for creating Kaleidoscope Learning Circle, which was primarily seen as Kaleidoscope Learning Center. So for the last 15 years, I had a place in Bertrand, Michigan, indoor heated arena. Even though I've done this work in other locations and partnered with Pam McPhee and Paul Smith, and I've actually done it in Puerto Rico and Dubai.
Cool. That sounds fun.
Yeah,
tell
it really
us stories
was.
about those two places and what that cultural experience was with horses.
Well, the language of Equus is universal. So it's really about helping partner with them to be able to have the humans have the insights. And so that's why I did that TEDx, Horse Wisdom for the Human World, to kind of tell that story as well. But I recently sold the farm. So I no longer am location-based. I never really was. But there was much of a connection to that, as far as that was who I was. And so the launch of the rebranding is really an invitation to see where it resonates, where my facilitation styles, skills, gifts, talents, where we can co-create things and collaborate and help people. And so one of the ways, in addition to the website, which just tells my story for folks that need a place to be able to learn a little more, is going to be these processing cards. So I've created a processing deck where on one side is a picture from an actual Kaleidoscope program. Shannon is featured on one as well.
Shannon Knapp from Horse Sense of the Carolinas, for those of you that wanted a reference point.
And then on the other side is one word that tells the story, a prompt, and then a quote from an actual participant, and a chakra in the lower corner. So depending upon where your facilitators land, they can use these in a multiple different ways. And I've even got some guidelines and some suggestions on how you might want to use them. And then I'm going to use each image as a blog and tell the story behind the picture. And what were the lessons learned from the people that participated in that? Similar to when you were asking about these different stories and experiences, is there's profound insight into, you know, reliving them and sharing kind of those takeaways that I want to share.
That's
and they're my
beautiful.
stories to tell.
Yeah. No, that's great. Speaking of your stories to tell, can you share with us some of the obstacles that you personally have overcome to get to live your dream and help others?
Oh gosh, I would say professionally in the beginning, because I've been doing this, you know, a long time, 20 years or so, was the lack of awareness. They always thought we were a therapeutic writing center. And so it was untraining people of what we were, training them about what we were. Because we went to expos, you know, we did demos, all sorts of different things. But to this day, if I meet people and say I do something in partnership with horses, they still think you're therapeutic riding or working with handicapped, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah.
So that was a big lift, big thing to overcome. And I think now with the internet and media and communities and more of a holistic approach, are non-denominational, as we were talking earlier.
Right.
Where it's not just the member organizations that are fighting for themselves, that everyone in the equine assisted learning and mental health industry is starting to see it as a collective and have more of an abundant mentality.
Yeah,
I think
God,
we've got,
so
there's
beautiful.
more potential. Yeah. So I would say that was one of the biggest challenges, was that piece of it. And then, you know, personally, the self-doubt with some of it, and, you know, overcoming some of those types of things when things didn't work well, or we didn't grow. I was also really committed, and still am, to customizing programs, because I like to be learner-centered.
Yeah.
And so that means it's not the off-the-shelf model, but I've relaxed that in being willing to create a more organized offering that's customizable within those modules, so that I can tell the story easier and it can resonate. And I'm not asking my potential client to do so much work, because people aren't as comfortable with that. And it takes someone that's really willing to be vulnerable, that doesn't know what, because I'm blank, I don't know what the outcome's going to be. It's like, well,
that's the beauty of the work.
right. And that scares people. It's like, oh, okay, well then, maybe especially in organizations. And so they're not coming to a therapist. They're coming for improved communication, but often they want you to fix someone else. And so if you can find those great people that are willing to fix themselves as well, those are the folks that are the best to work with. So anyway, some of those are the obstacles, I guess. And it's a continuous process.
Yeah.
You know, especially now as we figure out what has to be done virtually, or what can be done virtually and still have impact.
Yeah. And didn't you just sold your farm, right?
I did in February. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, how are you doing with your horses?
I rehomed them in the fall, and I actually had some fabulous, there was one bumpy experience, but it ended up extremely well. So they are in loving, caring, better places, actually, because without the activity that I wasn't developing, it really wasn't fair to them. And so now they're in a place, they're all in places where they have daily attention and love. It's the good next chapter for them. And it was necessary for me to be able to get out from underneath all of that responsibility. And I'm grateful for it. I never wanted to start a business. I never did. And that's probably why it didn't succeed. But it was the only way I knew how to get there. And I had the potential to do it. I was able to get the loan. And I had the education. So it was like, well, you can't not then, right? So as, you know, I watched your interview with Shannon Knapp from Horse Sense. Shannon and I have some similar paths of reinventing ourselves over time, figuring out, you know, what are the communities that we can serve and support and do good work with, and being willing to admit, You got to let that go in order to pick this up. And that's hard, but it gets easier. When it gets clear, then you know. You just, you know.
You have to trust your intuition and just take that leap of faith and, you know, like have faith in your capabilities and your intelligence and your drive, your willingness to, you know, rise up with fortitude and
surround yourself with good people that give you honest and authentic feedback. And that's a huge, that community of, you know, really being within spaces that you've got folks that you can get honest feedback is huge in order to help guide that process.
It really is.
Yeah.
To create those safe spaces. I mean, even if you can only just find one person that will always tell you the truth, there's a lot of comfortability in that because you get to trust that person. You know that no matter what, even if it's something you don't want to hear, it's coming from a place of love and that you trust them, that they're not judging you and that they're just letting you know like what's going on. And like judgment has such a different, you know, like painful connotation for so many people, but we have to make judgments to stay alive. Yeah, and you see somebody flying up behind you on the freeway, right? And they're gonna come up to you. You can make a judgment. Either you get to like pay attention, engage, like, oh, is that person probably gonna cut me off? Like maybe I should brake now just in case. And like sometimes they come cut you off, or you have to like, nah, I'm just gonna like sit here and it'll probably be fine. You're like, no, like I don't want that person to cut in front of me. I'm gonna hit the gas. Those are all judgments. You know, like like what's your like risk level today? Like what's your mood like? Do you want to race? How big is your truck? And yeah, I just like to laugh about all of it. Well, Tracy, it's been really beautiful. And oh wait, there was one more thing that I wanted to talk to you about before we left. Gosh, I almost forgot. So Tracy, you applied for a grant.
Yes.
Tell us about that grant.
I did. So the Mind and Life Institute has funding available, and we put in a request for what my friend Stacy Johnson has created called EASE Therapy. And EASE is a 6-session protocol to help overcome trauma. And so the study would actually be veterans with PTSD, people not identified or diagnosed with trauma, even though we know all of us have it.
Yeah, one degree or another.
Especially now, right? And then we want to do it both in person on the back of the horse. And she's actually done some study, a small study to show the efficacy of the work. So nice. we submitted that information to show that. And then the other will be done virtually. So we can determine whether what the variation is between actual on horse and virtual is. And then the third piece is a control group, so that it is a profound study. And I've been blessed when I put this out there, the world answered in a way that we have like 8 PhDs. And these are people I've never met in person. I've barely met on Zoom 2 weeks before. One of them is a grant writer who has a 98% success rate. And she randomly came through another connection right at the same time. So I have faith that this conversation is bound to happen, whether it's for this grant or future collaborations. But it was no accident the way it came together. And so it's pretty exciting. They say they're going to let us know in September. And so I'll be shouting from the mountaintops as soon as we find out. And hopefully we piqued their interest enough where in addition to this, we could do more.
Fantastic. And so we'll be doing it. If she gets the interview, you got the grant, then we'll get to do another interview to talk about the different scientific findings that she found and how she's helping people. And Tracy, what's your PhD again?
It's actually in leadership. I went to Andrews University, which was a competency-based, learner-centered model for adults. It's perfect. So I was able to actually create an individual development plan, go to conferences, learn things, come back, write a paper, and show the efficacy of what I learned. I have a 4.0.
She's a super smart lady, you guys. Like she knows her stuff. So we're really lucky to.
It's adult learning. That's how adults learn best, right? Is follow your passions and get rewarded for it.
It's true. Here, have a cookie.
Thank you. I will take one.
Oh, in the words of Carrie Lake, yeah, that I interviewed. Oh my gosh, she would say that all the time. She's like, "Have a cookie." I love it. Like, I love her. She's another author. She's a really wonderful human being. Someday I'll have to have an event where I just invite all the people that I interviewed, and we can all just get together and laugh and dance and play with ponies and
That sounds great.
eat amazing food, get a massage, do our own fun life coaching, grounding exercises. Because what's interesting is facilitators. I feel like we're so busy facilitating that we don't get to often just like play for ourselves. I mean, we do continuing education, right? But it's not the same, because that's like for a purpose. We don't get to like go and do some like fun retreat just to like relax and experience it. You know what I mean?
Well, you can find those communities. I have one that's around the OD work, and it's called Experiential Training Development Alliance,
Nice.
ETDA. And we are a family. We come together once a year for a summit, and we've been meeting virtually through this whole thing, sharing best practices. I mean, we truly love each other. And
I love to hear that so much.
Yeah, I think they're there, and if they're not there, go make them, which is what you just offered. So
that's what
I think
that's what I'm doing. I definitely have felt that's probably part of the reason that I do the interviews, because for other people as well as myself, because I felt so disconnected for so long, just like this lone wolf out in the world. And I'm just like, hey, I hear that there are other people out there that feel like they're lone wolves. Let's not make you so lonely. There are other people out there in the world doing really great work, and it's important for people to feel seen and heard and validated for the incredible things that they're doing in the world, not only for like their own interpersonal like validation and journey, but also for other people to know the amazing services that we provide, and that they don't need to suffer, and that there are incredible people like literally all over the world empowering others. And it's good for people to see something positive out there instead of like the negative stuff that seems to permeate social media these days.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for doing this. I mean, you're putting yourself out there, and I know you're having fun and following your dreams as well. But I just really, we're a grateful community of equine assisted learning and mental health folks that you're taking this effort.
Thank you. I really appreciate that a lot, Tracy. So with those lovely words, I'm going to say goodbye to you and our viewers. And thank you so much for your time, and for everybody for watching. Bye.